Good morning, ACT Prep. It is a Tuesday morning when I am filming this video, and the sun is shining, as you can see on my face, and the geese are squawking across the peninsula. So forgive that, but just know that I greet you and I'm happy to see you. And I pray that you're doing well. And I'm going to open us in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day that you have created. We thank you, Father, for calling us to be your own. Father, I pray for each student today that you would be with them, that you would be near them, that you would be with their families, that you would speak to them, Father, that you would show them your will and your way today. And Father, that you would plant in them such a desire to follow it. Lord, we know that as we prepare to take this ACT, that it is just a step in the process, that the ACT itself is not important, but your purposes for us are. And so this is part of achieving those purposes you have for us. Lord, we thank you that you are with us, and Father, that you grant us peace and comfort and strength each day. We ask all these things in your name. Amen. Okay. Today, we are going to do chapter 4, and it's really a short, it just has 2 sections. It's a short chapter, and I think knowing the 2 pieces of information in it will help you. I've created this PowerPoint, or I've put the pages in there to help you kind of see what I highlight. We'll walk through the questions together. So, but be sure, if you have any questions, something doesn't make sense, that you let me know. Okay, so we're going to be dealing today with what we call inverse trends and outside knowledge. And I've attempted here to sort of highlight what I would have highlighted in the passage. And I'm trying to get rid of my face so it's not so in your way. There we go. Okay. So let's look at what inverse trends. What is an inverse trend? Okay, well, so an inverse trend, which when you see inverse trends on the ACT, they're usually the last question of the section because they seem a little bit more complicated. So inverse trend means that when you have one variable doing one thing, the other variable is doing the opposite, the inverse, okay? So for example, if one variable is increasing, then the other variable is decreasing. And for some reason, inverse trends are just a little bit harder to see, to understand. It's always tempting to think that when one variable is increasing, another is also increasing, or if one is decreasing, the other is decreasing. Inverse trends are also harder to see on figures. Just be aware. They're a little bit easier to see on a table when the data is represented on a table. So this book kind of gives you this tip that, like, if you're like nearing the end of a passage or a section and one variable is doing one thing and you don't quite understand the science of what's going on, you probably ought to choose the answer choice that makes the other variable do the opposite of what the variable in the question is doing. Now, it tells you, and I highlighted this doesn't work 100% of the time, but this is like a way to have an educated guess. If you're running out of time, or if you have read the question and you just don't understand what they're asking, and it's a question that's at the end of the passage or at the end of the test, then most likely it's an inverse trend, okay? So let's look kind of at these examples here, and that's sort of what I highlighted in this. I still want you to read this stuff. That gives you another layer of learning. You know, I'm just trying to layer this stuff. My teaching gives you a layer, the book gives you a layer, working the questions gives you a layer, and hopefully puts all this stuff in your brain. Okay, now, I want to emphasize something else too. We talked about in the first chapter, those locators. Anytime that you have a question, you really want to always begin with the locators. It tells you where to look and what you're looking for. So let's look at question number 1. Suppose that, now I'm going to stop for just a second. We have study 1, and we have the passage information that's up here. This is what we call the passage information, and then we have a figure. I've sort of touched on this, but haven't hit really hard home on it. But some of these questions, you don't really need to read this stuff. You can sometimes just go to the figures and find the answer without getting bogged down in all this stuff. Like in our last video, we talked about when you have vague, like here, vague independent variables in the legend, trial 1 and trial 2, you might need to go to the passage and read more information about it. That's what we talked about That was in chapter 3 underneath generic labels on page 55. So this, we might need to read a little bit of this to find out about that, but let's see what our question asks us first to see if we need to. All right, so suppose that in a new study, so not this study, the student used the hot plate to heat 400 milliliters of water. Based on figure 1 and other information provided, at time equals 6s, the temperature of the water inside the beaker would most likely be 1. Okay, all right, so let's go look. In trial 1, we see that as the temperature decreases, as the time increases, the temperature is decreasing. But for trial 2, we see that as time increases, the temperature increases. So look, we've got to go look at some of this. So here we go. So let's see, the student performed an experiment to measure the temperature of a beaker of water over time. The student measured 200 milliliters of water and placed the beaker in the freezer at -2 Celsius. The thermometer was placed inside the beaker and the temperature was recorded every 2 seconds. So that was trial 1. Trial 1, 2 milliliters of water, put in the freezer, measured every 6 seconds, okay? A thermometer was placed inside the beaker and temperature was measured. Okay, then a student measured 200 milliliters of water, and placed the beaker on a hot plate. Hot plate was turned to 75% power. The thermometer was placed inside the beaker and the temperature was recorded every 2 seconds. The student recorded the results in figure. So our question is asking us that you have a new study, and this time it's 400 milliliters of water based on figure 1, the other information provided. At time 6s, the temperature of the water inside the beaker would most likely be. Okay, so let's look at 6s, the water. So we're looking at trial 2 because it's the one that was on the hot plate. So, it probably, when it was 200 milliliters of water at 6 seconds, the temperature was what? Oh, about 5 degrees Celsius. So you got 400 water. So it probably would be, I'm gonna say it probably is gonna be less than 5 degrees Celsius. Now, why? It wouldn't be between 5 and 7 because it's more water. It's going to take more power to heat, right? So it wouldn't be, so that's why you can rule out B. You can rule out C for the same reason, and D. So A is really your only, it's going to be somewhere below what the 200 milliliter was, okay? All right, now let's look at 2 and 3. I hope everybody understands that. This says this questions below do not refer to any set of data. So we are just going to use our brains to kind of figure it out. As acceleration increases, will the time it takes an object to reach the bottom of an inclined plane increase or decrease, and why? Okay. All right, so you do this kind of, your options are either decrease, increase, decrease, increase. So you got to decide, you think it's going to decrease or increase? Think for just a minute. Hope that you said acceleration is going to increase, so the time is what they're asking is going to actually decrease, right? Because as acceleration increases, that thing's going to go faster, that object's going to go faster, and so the time is what they're asking to decrease. That's an example of an inverse trend, right? So when one variable is going up, the other's going down. So we've got 2 decrease options, F and H. We can automatically rule out G and J. So let's look at F says decrease because velocity will increase, and then H says decrease because velocity will increase. So if you know anything about velocity, your answer is going to be H. Velocity is going to increase. Okay, let's look at 3. The LED would best conduct electricity if the resistant values of the circuit equaled which of the following values? Okay, so those are all resistance. values. And so it says the LED would best conduct. So conduct, you want the electricity to flow. So if you want electricity to go up, then you want your resistance to go down, right? Because resistance keeps it from flowing. So another inverse trend. So if the LED would best conduct electricity if the resistance of the circuit equal to what? And you want to look for the lowest value. Which one, A, B, C, or D, should be the lowest resistance? That's a measurement of resistance right there. It's going to be A, 20. I hope you got that. Okay, so inverse trends. When one variable is going up, the other is decreasing. What you need to know is that usually at the end of a passage, some of the last questions are going to be inverse trends. They're a little bit harder to see. They're definitely harder to see on a figure than they are on a table. But just be aware that these relationships exist. Like, it's not always when one variable is increasing, the other is increasing. And sometimes in the ACT, they make it kind of hard to see. So we had to read the passage for question 1 to understand what was going on. And we also had to kind of use our brains. I hope that makes sense. Let's talk about outside knowledge. I sort of highlighted this whole paragraph, as you see. Now, here's what you want to know, that sometimes there are questions on the ACT that require outside knowledge. This represents a very small fraction of questions on the ACT, but they do exist. And that's why we kind of say you don't need to know a ton of advanced science to do ACT, but you do need to know a few things. And so in the next page is going to kind of give you some suggestions of things that you might want to know. Now, outside knowledge questions on ACT are easy to identify because they usually appear as the last question of some of the passage in this section. And a lot of times they have science terms or equations as answer choices. So I might even there double underline in a different color that right there. So how do I identify these outside questions? Well, because usually it says they have science term. They can be the last question in the passage, kind of like inverse trends. They have science terms and equations as answer choices. Now, it's important to quickly identify these outside knowledge questions so you don't waste time going back to the passage and trying to read and find something, because outside knowledge, you just either know it or you don't. It doesn't really matter what the passage says. So if you either can know it and answer it and move on, or make a quick guess and move on. So I think that's the next page is going to be a cheat sheet, and I'm really going to challenge you and I'm going to test you on that knowledge. I really want you to learn that. We'll talk about that next. So let's look at, I'll do 4 and 5 with you, and then I want you to do 6 through 10. Okay, so 4, or maybe 4. Is it 4? Yeah, it's 4. All right, when honeybees synthesize proteins, the RNA genetic code is converted into a long polypeptide chain. Which of the following molecules represents the building blocks of this polypeptide chain? Now, that's outside knowledge. If you remember, this is like 7th grade science, but you probably had it in biology as well. But amino acids are the building blocks of those proteins. And so that's outside knowledge. Either you know it or don't, but amino acids popular. So it's going to be J. All right, now, number 5, plants atop a green roof absorb and release various molecules in forms of energy. Which equation best represents the exchange of molecules between plants and the atmosphere? So, so you really just have to kind of think, what do you know about plants? So light, water, sugar, water, we know that they respirate CO2, right? So they take in the light and the water, and they respirate oxygen. Sorry, Kylie, I'm not thinking. So really C is going to be your only answer right here, because you have light, water plus CO2, and then they release sugar and oxygen. And really, it's the only one, they don't respirate CO2, they respirate oxygen, right? They take in the CO2. Everybody knows that, right? Okay, so C, sorry I misspoke, is your right answer. Okay, go ahead and do 6 through 10 when you have time. I'm not going to wait, or you can stop the video and then go on if you want to, but be sure to attach that page in your OneNote section that I created for you underneath this section. Okay, outside knowledge. I wrote down here, no, y'all like my scribble scrabble on the computer. I don't know how people really write like that. Y'all, these are the things that the people who wrote this book have discovered are popular things to ask about. And there's some things that you should just know, kind of like the freezing point of water and the boiling point of water. There's always, I've seen many science ACT questions about Punnett squares and genes and knowing like these terms like heterozygous and homozygous and alleles. They love to ask about energy, potential and kinetic energy. These definitions you really should know. So please, please, please take time to study this page. I think it will help you on those outside knowledge questions. Okay, so now it is time for you to take the practice test for 3 and 4. These little sections that kind of summarize a section give you some good tips to remember. Remember the elements of the experiment. What are they changing and what are they measuring? Remember, what they are changing is the independent variable. What they are measuring is the dependent variable. Dependent variable on the ACT is generally on the y-axis. Independent is generally on the x-axis or in the legend if time is on there. Look for scientific method questions late in the passage and different types of data introduced. Look for inverse trends on those late question passages. And then sometimes it's all about outside knowledge. You've got to identify those quickly, and you can know that because they're at the end of the passage. They have equations or scientific terms as their answer choices. And then never forget that when you get into trouble, stick to our main approach, which is finding Waldo. I know many of y'all don't know that reference, but that means find your locators. So I said, let me translate. Find Waldo means start with your locators always. Where do you need to look and what do you need to look for? And looking at reading the question and looking at your answer choices always a great way. Okay, so that's it for chapter 4, and I hope for chapter 3, I'm gonna do a quick review in the next video, and then you will be ready to take your test. Your test begins on page 62. And it ends on page 71, I believe. Nope, 73. And you need to time yourself. You need to give yourself 35 minutes to answer those 40 questions. That's a huge strategy. Timing is a huge strategy, so make sure you time yourself. Unless you have an accommodation, you can give yourself time and a half. Anyway, I'll see y'all in the next video. Take care.